This video is a transformative review presentation. We do not intend to replace the original work. All rights belong to their respective owners. Please support the official and original creators.
What if I told you this movie was never actually about zombies? In 1968, when audiences walked into theaters to watch Night of the Living Dead, they thought they were just paying to see a standard horror flick. They had no idea they were about to witness the most terrifying breakdown of human nature ever captured on celluloid. And the scariest part? The true villain of this movie never even appeared on screen. Suddenly, fast dark synth music hits, a sharp glitch effect and a mystery sound effect. Millions of people have watched this black and white classic, but almost nobody understood its real, disturbing message. Decades ago, director George A. Romero secretly laid bare a truth about humanity that we are still living through today. But the nightmare behind the scenes, and that traumatic ending, changes everything. Let's unwrap the real horror. The movie doesn't start with a cheap jump scare or a massive explosion. It starts with a deeply unsettling, suffocating silence. A brother and sister, Barbara and Johnny, drive out to a completely isolated cemetery in rural Pennsylvania to place flowers on their mother's grave. There isn't a soul around for miles. Just the rustling of the wind and the dead. But right here, Romero plays a brilliant psychological trick on the audience. He sets the camera at bizarre, low angles, subconsciously making you feel like someone, or something, is watching them from behind the trees. You start feeling anxious and you don't even know why. Then, out in the distance, a strange figure appears. A lone man dragging his feet, shuffling aimlessly toward them. Johnny, trying to mess with his terrified sister, jokingly whispers, "They're coming to get you, Barbara." But that joke instantly morphs into a living nightmare. That strange man isn't sick. He isn't drunk. He is something else entirely. When he lunges forward, there is no anger in his face. No emotion. His eyes are completely vacant, the empty stare of a corpse. Right here, this film single-handedly rewrote the rules of the entire horror genre. There are no vampires or ghosts here. This is death itself walking. Barbara somehow breaks away, running for her absolute life, and stumbles into a deserted, barricaded farmhouse. This is where the film locks you into its real psychological trap. Claustrophobia. The absolute fear of being cornered. The windows are shattered, the phone lines are dead, and outside, the darkness is closing in. Suddenly, the terrifying silence is broken by a stranger named Ben, who is also running for his life. Now you have a locked house, two total strangers, and an outside threat they cannot comprehend. With zero background music, just the raw sound of heavy breathing and creaking wood, the tension becomes so thick the audience can barely breathe. But here is the most disturbing detail. No one inside that house and no one watching in the theater has any clue what is happening to the world. Is it a disease? Is it a curse? Or is it a radiation leak from a space probe? The radio broadcasts are chaotic, fragmented, and contradictory. Even the government is completely clueless. In the first 10 minutes, the film strips away the one thing we take for granted in real life, the illusion of security. You are left feeling utterly alone and helpless. But this is where things become disturbing. The real terror isn't the monsters pacing outside the house. The real horror begins when they realize who else is hiding under that roof. What happened on that set that genuinely terrified the actors? And what was the horrifying truth about the meat used in the film? The next scene changes everything. Today, making a horror movie requires hundreds of millions of dollars and cutting-edge CGI. But back in 1968, George A. Romero and his friends had nothing but a dream and a microscopic budget. The total cost to make this film? Just $114,000. In modern Hollywood, that barely covers the catering budget for a single week. To save money, they couldn't afford a studio. That creepy farmhouse wasn't a set. It was a real, abandoned house scheduled to be demolished. The filmmakers literally begged the owner to lease it to them for pennies. The decaying walls and cracked ceilings you see on screen weren't props. They were real ruins. Now let's talk about the one thing no zombie movie can survive without: blood and human flesh. How do you pull that off on a shoestring budget without Hollywood special effects? Romero used a psychological trick that sounds hilarious now, but absolutely traumatized audiences back then. Because the movie was shot in black and white, he didn't need red dye. He used Bosco chocolate syrup. Every drop of thick, dark blood dripping down the screen was actually sweet chocolate. But it gets grislier. In the infamous scene where the ghouls are tearing apart human remains, what were the actors actually eating? It was real roasted chicken, sourced from a local butcher shop. The actors had to viciously rip apart and chew cold, raw, looking chicken while acting like mindless monsters. Years later, some of the cast confessed they were dry, heaving the second the camera stopped rolling. And those dozens of zombies surrounding the house? They weren't paid Hollywood extras. They were ordinary citizens of Pittsburgh, the filmmakers' friends, relatives, and even the local investors who financed the movie. They would work their day jobs, and in the evening they'd throw on ripped clothes, smear white powder and mud on their faces, and show up to play ghouls. Their only payment? A warm meal and a case of beer at the end of the night. Yet, their raw, unpolished performances felt so real, it left audiences sweating in their seats. But this leads us to the biggest, most heartbreaking fact of all. Night of the Living Dead went on to gross millions worldwide, becoming one of the most successful independent films in cinematic history. But the creators? They walked away completely broke. Oh. The film was originally titled Night of the Flesh Eaters. At the last minute, the distributor changed the title. In the frantic rush to swap the title cards, they accidentally deleted the copyright notice, copyright, from the prints. Under 1968 U.S. law, failing to display that symbol automatically pushed the work into the public domain. The theaters made millions. The TV networks broadcasted it for free. Home video companies sold millions of tapes. Everyone got rich off this movie except the people who bled for it. It remains the most expensive and tragic clerical error in cinema history. But financial ruin was a secondary tragedy. Something happened on that set that changed the lead actor's life forever. A character who terrified 1968 America, not just because of the horror, but because of a dark social reality. Why did the hero of this movie become a threat to society? Let's break it down, and to understand the genius of this film, you have to look at the lead character, Ben. In 1968, casting Dwayne Jones, a black actor, as the commanding, intelligent lead hero was an absolute bombshell. At the height of the civil rights movement, Hollywood simply did not put black men in charge, especially over white characters. But Romero didn't care about the politics. He cast him because he was simply the best actor for the job. But Ben's character isn't legendary just because of the color of his skin. His real power lies in his deep trauma and survival instinct. While Barbara is completely catatonic with shock, Ben is the only one driving the survival plan. He boards up windows, lights fires, and fights off the flesh eaters. But if you look closely, Ben is masking a profound, volatile anger. He isn't a superhero. He is a deeply terrified man trying desperately not to lose his mind. He does everything right to maintain control, but fate had other plans. Then, the narrative shifts when Harry Cooper emerges from the basement. Harry had been hiding down there with his wife and sick daughter. This is where the real psychological war begins. Harry Cooper is universally hated by everyone who watches this movie. He is a coward, he is selfish, and he is a tyrant. But if we are brutally honest with ourselves, doesn't that ugly selfishness switch on in all of us when our lives are on the line? Harry believes the sealed basement is the only safe zone. Ben argues that the main floor offers escape routes. This isn't just an argument about survival tactics. It's a clash of human ideologies. Harry Cooper represents the darkest side of human nature, the willingness to sacrifice everyone else just to buy yourself one more hour of life. He isn't terrified of the monsters outside. He's terrified of losing control inside. In many ways, the real rot isn't the zombies, it's Harry Cooper's mindset. And then we have the women of the film. Barbara, our initial protagonist, completely breaks after watching her brother die. Her mind simply cannot process the horror, throwing her into a catatonic state. She doesn't scream, she doesn't cry, she just stares into the void. It's a chillingly realistic portrayal of how sudden trauma can completely paralyze human cognition. On the other hand, we have Helen Cooper, Harry's wife. She is completely disgusted by her husband's cowardice, but she is trapped by her devotion to her dying daughter. She represents the absolute agony of a mother watching her entire world slow motion crash into a wall. Think about the dynamic. A horde of flesh-eating monsters is breathing down their necks outside, yet inside, these people are tearing each other apart over ego and fear. But did the filmmakers secretly plant clues around the house that predicted the horrific ending before it even happened? Nobody noticed these details. Pay close attention to this section because we are about to decode the cinematic wizardry that your brain feels, but your eyes don't consciously see. Director George Romero heavily utilized Dutch angles, intentionally tilting the camera off-center. Whenever a fight breaks out inside the house, or the danger outside spikes, the camera subtly leans. Psychological studies show that when human eyes view tilted horizons, it triggers a subliminal sense of instability and dread in the subconscious mind. Romero managed to induce panic without a single expensive special effect, purely by tilting his lens. Now look at the news broadcasts playing in the background on the radio and TV. In the beginning, the media calls it a string of unexplained murders. Then it's a strange epidemic. Finally, they blame space radiation. The hidden detail here is that throughout the entire movie, the government and the scientists have absolutely no idea what is going on. Romero was hiding a massive anti-establishment critique in plain sight. He wanted to show that when a true crisis hits, the authorities we trust blindly are just as clueless and helpless as the rest of us. The static fuzz on the TV screen was a metaphor for the fading signal of human hope. Even though the movie is black and white, the contrast of light and shadow is masterfully orchestrated. The upstairs living room is filled with bright light from the fires Ben builds. This light represents hope, action, and the will to fight. The basement, however, is a pitch-black abyss. If you look at its architectural structure, the basement looks exactly like a tomb. Without uttering a single word, the filmmakers gave the audience a massive clue. Anyone who treats that darkness as a shield is literally digging their own grave. In modern horror, when a monster appears, a massive orchestral hit blasts through the speakers to force a jump scare. But in Night of the Living Dead, during the most horrific sequences, there is absolute silence. When Barbara is running or when the wood is splintering, there is no music. Just the sound of heavy panting, shattering glass, and the wind. This wasn't a technical limitation, it was a brutal artistic choice. When the music stops, the barrier between the movie and reality dissolves. The audience forgets they are in a theater. They feel like they are trapped in that room. The camera angles, the lighting contrast, the suffocating silence, they were all designed to build an atmosphere. But what if the deepest horror lies in the crazy theories developed by the film's cult fanbase? A theory that suggests Barbara never actually made it out of that cemetery, and another that points to a classified government operation. What are these chilling theories that still keep film buffs awake at night? Let's begin with the most terrifying theory of all. One that completely flips this movie into a psychological thriller. The cemetery hallucination theory. This theory suggests that in the opening minutes, when that first ghoul attacks Barbara and Johnny at the grave, Johnny dies instantly. But Barbara? She never actually escaped. In reality, the monster caught her and killed her right there in the grass. So what is the rest of the movie? The theory argues that in her final milliseconds of consciousness, Barbara's brain suffers a catastrophic traumatic break. The farmhouse, Ben, the Coopers, the army of the dead outside, none of it is real. It is all the chaotic, dying hallucination of Barbara's failing brain. She visualizes herself trapped in a house with no exit, which is the perfect psychological metaphor for her own inescapable death. If you watch the movie through this lens, the horror shifts from a zombie outbreak to the tragic firing of a dying mind. Then we have the theory that hits incredibly close to home for modern audiences, the government bio-weapon theory. The scientists on TV repeatedly screamed that the outbreak was caused by radiation from a Venus space probe. But fans don't buy it. They believe the space radiation was a fabricated cover-up story pushed by the military. In reality, the US military was secretly testing a highly classified neurological bio-weapon designed to reanimate dead tissue, creating an unstoppable army that feels no pain and requires no logistics. The virus accidentally leaked into that rural Pennsylvania town. Notice how the military and local posses dispose of the bodies later in the film. They aren't acting like a rescue operation or emergency responders. They are acting like a cleanup crew systematically erasing all evidence of a massive government screw-up. Finally, we have the most chilling, poetic theory, the biblical Judgment Day theory. Years later, a sequel spawned one of the most iconic lines in horror history: "When there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth." This theory claims there was no virus, no radiation. It was literally Judgment Day. The zombies weren't monsters. They were a mirror held up to humanity. The moment the dead rise, the living immediately turn on each other. The plague wasn't killing the flesh. It was exposing that human civilization was already dead inside. Whether it's Barbara's dying dream, a government bioweapon, or the apocalypse, these theories force us to look deeper into the frame. But what is the real-life connection here? How did a 1968 black and white film accurately predict modern panic, social media echo chambers, and the collapse of modern society 50 years before it happened? Let's face the dark reality, in watching this 1968 classic today feels less like watching an old movie and more like watching a modern live-streamed news report. The moment the radio announces that a crisis is unfolding, the social contract completely evaporates. Instead of organizing to protect one another, People immediately default to tribalism, hoarding resources, and locking themselves in silos. Does this sound familiar? Whenever a modern crisis hits our real world, whether it's a global pandemic or a hyper-viral rumor on the internet, what is the first thing humans do? We rush to supermarkets, panic, buy resources, clear out the shelves, and abandon our neighbors to fend for themselves. Night of the Living Dead proved that fear spreads infinitely faster than any physical pathogen. What social media and algorithms do to public panic today, sheer terror did to those characters in 1968. There is another deeply unsettling real-world connection here, the total collapse of institutional authority. We navigate our daily lives under the comforting illusion that if everything goes wrong, the government, the police, or the experts will swoop in and save us. Our entire societal stability relies on that belief. But look at the authorities in the film. The scientists change their theories every hour. The police are just clearing sectors to protect their own perimeters. They don't care about a handful of citizens trapped in a random house. This film forces us to confront a cold, hard truth. When a true black swan event occurs, the institutions we rely on will fail. You are entirely on your own. Romero warned us half a century ago that the true horror of a crisis isn't the threat itself. It's the sudden realization that no one is coming to save you. In psychology, there is a concept known as othering, the survival mechanism where we immediately identify outsiders as the enemy to protect our own tribe. In the house, the survivors don't just separate themselves from the zombies, they balkanize themselves. We stay upstairs, you stay in the basement. Even today, whenever a political, economic, or social crisis hits, we immediately divide humanity into us versus them. We forget that the crisis is the enemy, and we start hunting each other. The ghouls outside have no malice, no hatred. They are just acting on pure instinct. The real hatred, spite, and ego belong entirely to the people who claim to be alive. This connection forces us to question who the real monsters are. But this masterpiece almost never made it to the screen. When it debuted in 1968, it sparked a massive wave of outrage, with multiple countries attempting to ban it completely. What was the dark truth about the production that almost caused a fatal tragedy on set? Let's look at the controversies. When Night of the Living Dead hit theaters in the fall of 1968, it hit American culture like a physical blow. Back then, the modern MPA rating system didn't exist in its current form. Because of this loophole, distributors booked the film for Saturday matinees, the exact time slot where parents routinely dropped off young children for an afternoon movie. The theaters were packed with hundreds of completely unsupervised, innocent kids. The moment the screen showed ghouls actively devouring human organs, and a young girl brutally stabbing her own mother to death with a trowel, the theater dissolved into pure chaos. Children were screaming, crying, and hiding under seats. The legendary film critic Roger Ebert was actually in the theater that day, writing that he witnessed children completely traumatized and psychologically shattered. The media erupted. Parents were furious. The film was branded as vile, obscene, and morally bankrupt, leading to massive public campaigns to ban the film entirely from American theaters. But the chaos wasn't just in the theaters. The lack of budget meant safety standards on set were practically non-existent. During a crucial scene, Ben and the survivors attempt to escape in an old truck, which ultimately crashes and explodes into a massive fireball. Because they couldn't afford a professional stunt crew or special effects coordinators, the crew literally poured real gasoline onto the truck and lit it with a match. Suddenly the wind shifted. A massive wall of real fire roared directly toward Bill Hensman, the actor playing the very first zombie. His clothes instantly caught fire. There were no fire extinguishers on set. The crew had to frantically sprint over, tackling him to the ground, using dirt, mud, and ripped clothes to suffocate the flames before he was burned alive. If they had been a few seconds slower, this movie would have become a crime scene. And then there was the footage that was too disturbing even for Romero. In the original rough cut, the feast scenes were infinitely more graphic. Romero had used real animal entrails and organs from a local slaughterhouse, filming extreme, visceral close-ups of the ghouls pulling apart raw organs. When this cut was shown to a small test audience, people literally ran out of the room to vomit in the lobby. The distributors flatly told Romero that if he didn't cut those frames, the police would shut down the theaters on opening night. Romero was forced to physically slice those frames out of the film reel. To this day, that lost, hyper-gory footage has never been found. It is believed to be destroyed forever. Controversies, near-fatal accidents, and censorship campaigns couldn't stop this film from changing cinema history. But set all of that aside. Because we are now approaching the one element that defines this film's legacy. The final 10 minutes. An ending so brutal, it permanently shattered the audience's belief in justice, law, and humanity. Without spoiling the plot, what was the dark reality behind that climax? Let's face the ending. After a relentless night of sheer claustrophobia, screams, and watching loved ones slip away, the sun finally rises over the horizon. The longest night is over. In classic cinema, the dawn is a universal symbol of safety. The monsters burn away, help arrives, and the audience can finally breathe a sigh of relief. Romero deliberately lets you feel that relief. He makes you believe that whoever survived that gauntlet is finally safe. But right here, Romero executes the most cynical, devastating twist in film history. The sigh of relief he gives you is a complete lie. The morning light isn't there to signal a new beginning. It's there solely so you can see the absolute scale of the devastation in stark, unyielding clarity. You sit there, silently praying for a happy resolution, completely unaware that the director is about to systematically crush your faith in humanity. Out in the distance, the sound of barking dogs and gunfire breaks the morning silence. A rescue posse is approaching. The police, alongside local hunters and rednecks, are sweeping the countryside, systematically hunting down and executing the remaining ghouls. The survivor inside hears the gunfire and believes salvation has finally arrived. But look closely at the faces of those hunters. There is no empathy in their eyes. They aren't on a tragic rescue mission. To them, this isn't a crisis, it's a Sunday sport. They are laughing, drinking coffee, and casually posing for photos next to piles of corpses. Romero exposes a terrifying psychological truth. Under the guise of eliminating a threat, these civilized men have been granted a legal license to unleash their innermost cruelty and violence without consequence. The danger of the monsters is fading, but the tension on screen hits an absolute breaking point because a single gunshot is about to rewrite the entire narrative. And then, the final frame hits. A sound, a sudden shot that leaves the audience completely numb. In 1968, when the credits rolled, people walked out of the theater in absolute dead silence. No one spoke a word because that ending didn't just finish a movie, it executed the very concept of hope. What happened in that final minute? Did humanity actually win? Let's step into the final scene. The final shot. Ben, the man who fought like hell, survived the night, and did everything right, steps out into the daylight, only to be shot dead from a distance by the very posse that came to clear the area. They mistook him for a ghoul. No questions asked. No hesitation. As his body is casually dragged away with meat hooks and tossed onto a burning pile of corpses, the screen transitions into a series of gritty, high-contrast still photographs. They don't look like scenes from a horror movie. They look exactly like the real-world news footage of the racial violence and civil unrest tearing through America in the late 1960s. Romero proved that the virus was just a catalyst. Humans don't need a plague to destroy each other, we just need an excuse. The hero who conquered the monsters was ultimately destroyed by the casual negligence and prejudice of his own species. Now, I want to hear from you. Was what happened to Ben a reflection of cold, unyielding reality? Or is human nature fundamentally cursed, making this tragedy an inescapable fate? If this breakdown opened your eyes, leave a comment with just one word: reality or fate. I want to see how many of you truly understood the deeper message of this masterpiece. For more deep, psychological breakdowns of the movies that shaped our world, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, stay safe.